Good day. Hello. All right. We are live. Welcome, everybody. Hello. Good Thursday evening, late afternoon, Thursday evening, whatever you choose to call it. Good to see you. Hello. Today is Thursday, March 16th, 2023. You are watching the Jaybefaunt channel. I am your host, James Fauntleroy. It is so good to see you. Of course, if some of you are aware, the Sabby and JB show on RBN was earlier today because Sabby has a show that she's doing at 7 p.m. this evening. So we did that a little bit earlier. So as per usual, I decided, what the hell? Let me go live early in the evening before she goes on, just so that I can get this donezo, because I actually really wanted to get into this. So just to let you guys know, I also stream every single Tuesday at 2. So I'm also part of the Revolutionary Strength Blackout Network. So you can catch me on the JB Show on Sundays at 1 p.m. Eastern, and in the RBN Live on Tuesdays at 4, and the Savvy and JB Show typically on Thursdays at 6. Now, just want to let you guys know, please thank you for all of the support. Support being patrons on Patreon and on Coffee, as well as members. Yes, I do have memberships. Thank you so very much to everyone who has contributed to me in any way, shape, or form, as well as any type of mutual aid sent through various platforms in the descriptions of my videos. So thank you so very much to all of you. Now, if you guys would like, you guys can go to those links. They're also in the description, as well as the links to my Coffee and Patreon, and all the members that are people who are patrons are scrolling down below. Also, if you guys would like to give me an early like, that'd be much appreciated. That actually pushes me out into the algorithm, and I appreciate it, because we're going to do some examination, right? And the thing is that with readings like this, it's not just a reading straightforward like a narration. This is more of just getting into this and having an analysis based on my experience, right? In my experience being a socialist, being my analysis, being disabled, so that's part of what this is going to be coming with, along with. So I'll be stopping and making a few comments here and there. And so I hope that you guys get out of this what I have as well. So what are we going to be doing? Well, we're going to be getting into a new book. That's right, a new book. But before I do that, I would like to get to the chat, say hello to all the people that's watching, just to give my hellos to all of you first, okay? All right. We have Justice says, yes. When you were saying the other day that you wanted to read it personally, but to focus your channel on revolutionary reading, I thought to myself, rest is revolutionary, beautiful man. Thank you so very much. And actually, that's a good lesson for me to really remember, is because the system that we live in does not want us to live, if that makes any sense, right? So that's also going to be covered in the book. So I'll be reading the introduction as well as part 1 of chapter 1, so that we can have a full scope of what the doctor is talking about. But yes, definitely. Also, just let you guys know, I forgot, but please also go to my Substack if you want to get email notifications, because the algorithm and the notifications via YouTube aren't so reliable. So you guys can go to my Substack, go to Substack, say Jaybefaunt.substack.com, so you guys can get the email notifications as well. Also, we have Sweary Fairy says, super excited for this, bestie. This should be incredibly cathartic. Yes, reading it was cathartic for me. I'm gonna be real with you. This has been like, I'm like, So be prepared to be like, oh snap. Yeah, that's true. You're gonna say a lot of that's true. You guys are gonna be like, right, the whole time. Watch. I can't wait to get into this with you. Osito Arana says, story time. Story time. Remember that guy from Vine? Story time. Remember that guy? Oh my goodness, this is great. All right. So we have Miguel H also in the chat saying, peace, good to see you. And yes, please make sure to like and subscribe. Okay. Also, anybody that's watching on Rockfin, I hope that you guys also enjoy this as well. So, what are we reading? New book today. This is going to be a live reading of Laziness Does Not Exist. Yes, I am wearing this hoodie. This hoodie was actually designed by my niece, and I'm very happy. She has her own Etsy store, and I was like, let me wear it. So, I'm actually quite proud to wear it. And I hope she sees this at least, because she also likes to read books. She is a book reader, just like me. Or I'm becoming more of a book reader like her. So, now we're going to be starting off on chapter 1 on the introduction of Laziness Does Not Exist. Laziness Does Not Exist was actually authored by Dr. Devin Price. So, let me show you guys who Dr. Devin Price is. This is Dr. Devin Price. And so Dr. Devin Price was the one who authored this book. So thank you to Dr. Devin Price for this. And just the title alone makes you go, I wonder. All right. Good to see a soul construct. All right. Get prepared. We're about to read. Okay, so Laziness Does Not Exist, a defense of the exhausted, exploited, and overworked. This is going to be good. All right, so in the beginning it says, for Kim, who taught me that if a person's behavior doesn't make sense, it is because I'm missing a piece of their context. Ooh. This is getting deep, baby. So the introduction is entitled How I Learned I Wasn't Lazy. So this is going to be the introduction on page 1. All right. I have a reputation as a productive person, but that reputation has cost me a lot. To the rest of the world, I've always looked like a put-together, organized, diligent little worker bee. For years, I managed to balance professional success, creative output, and activism without letting anybody in my life down. I never turned work in late. If I said I was going to be at an event, I'd be there. If a friend needed help editing a cover letter for a job application, or moral support, as they called their congressional representative about the latest human rights horror at the moment, I was available. Behind that veneer of energy and dependability, I was a wreck. I spent hours alone in the dark, overstimulated and too tired to even read a book. I resented every person I said yes to, even as I couldn't stop overcommitting to them. I was forever spreading myself way too thin, dragging myself from obligation to obligation, thinking my lack of energy made me unforgivably lazy. I knew a lot of people like me. People who work overtime, never turning down additional work for fear of disappointing their boss. They're available to friends and loved ones 24/7, providing an unending stream of support and advice. They care about dozens and dozens of social issues, yet always feel guilty about not doing enough to address them, because there simply aren't enough hours in the day. These types of people often try to cram every waking moment with activity. After a long day of work, they try to teach themselves Spanish on the Duolingo app on their phone, for example, or they try to learn how to code on Python on sites like Code Academy. People like me, are doing everything society has taught us we have to do if we want to be virtuous and deserving of respect. We're committed employees, passionate activists, considerate friends, and perpetual students. We worry about the future. We plan ahead. We try to reduce our anxiety by controlling the things we can control, and we push ourselves to work very, very hard. Most of us spend the majority of our days feeling tired, overwhelmed, and disappointed in ourselves, certain we've come up short. No matter how much we've accomplished or how hard we've worked, we never believe we've done enough to feel satisfied or at peace. We never think we deserve a break. Through all the burnouts, stress-related illnesses, and sleep-deprived weeks we endure, we remain convinced that having limitations make us lazy, and that laziness is always a bad thing. This worldview is ruining our lives. This is deep, ain't it? Like, people overextending themselves like crazy just to fight this view of being lazy and never doing enough and never being enough, right? This makes me, okay, real talk. Being a content creator, I have looked at myself and I've looked at being an RBN as well as being a content creator just by myself. And I have had this feeling of just not being good enough, of not being smart enough, of not doing as much as everybody else. Having this imposter syndrome that bears down on me day in and day out. I have felt this imposter syndrome the minute I joined RBN way back in April of 2021. And sometimes I still feel it. But that's part of the problem. As Dr. Price is pointing out here. Interesting, right? Let's continue. For years, I fell into an awful pattern where I worked nonstop for the first 5 or 6 hours of the day, running through as many tasks as possible without any breaks. During those periods, I focused so intently on the mountains of emails I had to respond to, or the papers I had to grade, that I would often forget to pause and eat a snack, stretch my legs, or even use the bathroom. Anyone who interrupted me during those cram sessions would get a blank and irritated stare. Once those 5 hours were over, I collapsed into a cranky, hungry, and emotionally drained heap. I loved being super efficient like that, plugging away at all the items on my to-do list that had given me anxiety the night before. I could get a truly impressive amount of stuff done during those sprints. But when I worked myself that hard, I'd be completely useless afterwards. My afternoons were utterly non-productive, with me mindlessly scrolling through Instagram or Tumblr for hours. In the evening, all I had energy left to do was flop into my bed, watch a few YouTube videos, and eat chips in the dark of my apartment. Is that you? Is that you right now? Because that's damn sure me. That's me just having a channel sometimes. Are you flopped right now on the couch or on your bed, watching me read this book while having a snack? I don't blame you. This is what the system does to us. Sean Miller says, smoking a bowl, listening to JB, eating chips in the dark. Good day. Yeah. Thanks for that confirmation. Take a puff for me, will you? Oh. Sorry, Fairy says you had to come for me, huh? Oh man, Soul Contract said in my studio sipping some whiskey. Take a sip for me too. Okay. And then whoever says, I just finished eating chips. Whoever said I'm drinking vodka. Oh, Aceto says I'm at work. Oh, Aceto. Oh, man. Well, let's continue. This is good, isn't it? Man, all right. Eventually, after a few hours of recharging, I start to feel guilty for not using my time in a more productive ways. I should be out with friends, I tell myself. I should be working on creative projects. I should cook myself a nice, healthy dinner. I start to feel stressed about everything I needed to accomplish the next day. And then the next morning, the cycle of guilt, overwork, and exhaustion would start up all over again. Even back then, I knew this cycle was bad for me, and yet I found it hard to break out of it. As terrible as my exhaustion felt, completing a huge pile of tasks in a couple of hours felt almost equally good. I lived to check off my to-do list. I would get in a rush when somebody would exclaim, "Wow, that was fast," because I emailed back sooner than they expected. I would agree to take on more responsibilities than I wanted to handle because I felt a deep need to show I was a diligent, reliable worker. And then, after putting so many tasks on my plate, I would inevitably flame out and become depressed or sick. For years, I would berate myself for running out of steam. Whenever I didn't push myself to the limit, I felt shame about being stagnant. Whenever I said no to a task at work, I'd worry I wasn't earning my keep. If I failed to help a friend when they needed it, or didn't make it to a protest I planned to go to, or to a concert of a friend was performing in, I'd feel certain everyone was judging me. I was terrified that any time I took a break or drew a boundary, I was being lazy. After all, there was nothing worse I could be than that. As awful as being tired, overwhelmed, and burned out with no energy for hobbies or friends was, surely being lazy was worse. I learned at an early age to tie my self-worth to how productive I was. I got good grades, and teachers generally thought I was bright. So they encouraged me to work extra hard and take on more opportunities and responsibilities. Whether it was tutoring a struggling peer in civics class or running the arts and crafts table at Bible camp, adults would constantly ask me to take on extra responsibilities. And I would always say yes. I would want to be helpful, industrious, and successful. After all, working hard and doing a lot was how you ensure yourself a bright future. Were some of you like that? That diligent, studious student that did extracurricular activities and did more and put a whole lot on your plate to have a good name for yourself when you were younger? Was that you? That was a lot of us. I have my reasons for worrying about the future. My dad grew up in Appalachia, in an old mining town with dilapidated infrastructure. Job prospects were non existent. As an adult, my dad was forever fretting about his financial future. He had cerebral palsy, which made it very difficult for him to write or type, so going to college or getting an office job seemed out of the question to him. Instead, he worked backbreaking manual labor jobs, knowing his body wouldn't be able to handle them forever. My mom was a dental hygienist, but she suffered from scoliosis, which left her able to only work 2 or 3 days per week. Neither of my parents had university degrees, so the professional options were limited. They desperately wanted me to avoid the same fate, so they taught me to plan and prepare and work hard. They signed me up for my school's talented and gifted program, As soon as I was eligible, they encouraged me to get a part-time job, to take honors classes, and to participate in extracurriculars like Model UN and speech and debate. They believed that if I worked hard, saved my money, and took on many life's extra responsibilities, I could get ahead. I can get into a decent school, earn some financial aid, and forge a successful career for myself as long as I wasn't lazy. Teachers saw potential in me. They strongly encouraged this too. Well, millennials, come in for a second. Weren't you told that? Just work hard, take on some extra responsibilities, maybe join some clubs. That'll look good on a college application, right? That'll look good on a resume, right? Just keep doing this up. You'll get into a good career, make good money, and then be able to retire by 55. You were lied to, huh? Just like me. Yep. Let's continue. This pressure to achieve my way into stability caused me significant anxiety. But the alternative struck me as far worse. I was already beginning to notice that not all kids were encouraged to thrive the way I was. Some kids were seen as lost causes because they were disruptive or too slow to master a subject. When those kids were still young, they received some support and some sympathy. But the longer they struggled, the less patience and compassion they got. Eventually, people stopped talking about those students' needs or limitations. Instead, the conversation became how lazy they were. Once someone was deemed lazy, they were much likelier to get yelled at than they were to be helped. If a kid was lazy, there was no fixing it. It was their fault. And they were missing assignments, failing to grasp hard concepts, and not putting time into anything productive after school. Lazy kids didn't have futures, and the world seemed to be telling me they deserve what they got. Ooh. Think about it. Think about all those kids that were disruptive in class. Think about all those kids that just didn't seem to actually get it, right? And then at first they got help, but then it was just like, nah, there's no helping them. They don't want to help themselves, so I can't help them. We had some classmates like that. Maybe some of us were like that. Some people looked at us. Some people gave up on us. Right? Huh. Woo, boy. Max also learned to tie her wealth to her productivity. Like me, she came from a family that spent multiple generations in poverty in the rural South. Like me, she went on to achieve academically and professionally at a high level. And like me, her commitment to overwork started to eat her alive. Today, Max is a writer at an information technology firm where she puts together applications and proposals, as well as blog posts about the firm's work. In order to do her job well, Max needs a lot of support from her coworkers. They're supposed to provide her with detailed information on each project, completed application forms, and clean, well-written drafts. Often, though, Max doesn't get that information in time, leaving her scrambling to assemble what she needs herself while a looming deadline and an impatient boss breathes down her neck. She regularly works 80 to 90-hour weeks and seems constantly to be at her wit's end. These proposals have to be perfect, but I can't rely on anyone else to check on them carefully enough, Max says. Every government agency that we work with has different requirements. Sometimes it will be something as specific as requiring that we sign our forms in blue ink, not black. But the people I work with will miss this stuff all the time. And my manager doesn't exactly manage them. So then I'm in the office from 6 a.m. till 10 p.m. fixing everybody else's work so I have a chance at getting the contract. I knew Max had problems with overwork and overcommitment when I heard her complaining from probably the 10th time about having logged in 50 hours at work in a span of 3 days. I noticed how fragile she always seemed to be, how irritation about her job had turned into anger and despair. Her typical workday involves writing and editing proposals for hours and coming home, ordering takeout, and collapsing in front of the TV. Often, she's so exhausted that she forgets to eat dinner she's ordered. Her once beloved hobbies like witchcraft and embroidery often go neglected. On weekends, she sleeps until 4 p.m. just to recharge her batteries and recover from the stress she's endured during the week. She sometimes schedules massages and vacations to help herself decompress, but on a day-to-day basis, she's irritable and short-tempered, and often remarks on the joylessness of her life. I figured Max's intense lifestyle must have damaged her health, so I asked her about it. She said, "This effing job ruined my health and my personal life. Last year I had an inflamed gallbladder, but I didn't take any time off work because I knew my manager would pick apart my reasons for needing it and guilting me into coming into the office. By the time I went to the hospital, I was vomiting constantly and had to crawl on my hands and knees to the toilet instead of walking. They opened me up and found out my gallbladder was completely dead. The surgeon told me it was almost decayed, one of the most decayed one he had ever seen, and asked me why I hadn't come in then a month later. Then he gave me a big lecture about how I needed to take more sick days at work. I wanted to scream." When I met Max, we were both aspiring writers, sharing little snippets of stories and essays with each other on Tumblr. The beauty of Max's writing immediately made me want to get to know her better. There was a calmness and a sense of perspective in her work back then, which I just don't see in her life these days. She is an intense person, a quality I admire, but her job has made her cranky and brittle. She doesn't have patience for efficiency. She doesn't have patience for inefficiency or anything that strikes her as foolish. Her temper can flare something as simple as the pizza delivery person forgetting to bring ranch dressing. She hasn't written a short story in years. Max knows her work is consuming her life. She can see the toll it's taking on her relationships, her health, and her capacity to enjoy her hobbies. Max is also very aware that she places unfair expectations on herself, and that she shouldn't force herself to regularly work twice as many hours as her job supposedly requires. Still, she doesn't know how to stop. Like Max, I used to work to the point of exhaustion and illness. I had no idea how to make myself stop. Intellectually, I knew I was doing too much. My fear of missing a deadline or seeming lazy kept me plugging away without breaks. I didn't learn to change my ways until overwork utterly destroyed my health. It was February 2014, and I was putting the final touches on my dissertation. I'd known since I was a teenager I wanted to get a PhD in psychology, and I was finally close to attaining it. I couldn't think about anything else. I spent hours and hours in the lab, analyzing data long after my peers had gone home to their partners and children. I found an apartment 2 blocks from Loyola university where I was studying, so I wouldn't waste any time commuting to the office. I spent so much time there that I never bothered to buy furniture for my home or set up home internet connection. Then, about 2 weeks before I was scheduled to present my dissertation, I caught a nasty case of the flu. I didn't let it slow me down. I trudged into the office every day and stayed late into the night, the same as always, ignoring how sick I felt. I didn't even stop exercising. Since I didn't give myself any time to heal, the flu wouldn't go away. On the day of my dissertation defense, I was still running a fever and shivering in my suit jacket, trying desperately to hide it as I was presented the results of my research. How many times have I went to work as a line cook sick because I couldn't afford to take the day off and I had to work? How many times have I had a cold, tossing away at pasta, deep frying chicken tenders, making chicken wings, or preparing a sundae, or helping out on the grill? Yeah. Man. I graduated. The flu was still there. I started applying to jobs. I was still sick. For months, the flu stayed with me. Imagine having the flu for months. Imagine, man. I do my best to ignore it all day for the sake of remaining productive. But every evening I start shaking and would feel so weak and faint that I'd have to lie on the ground, wrapped in blankets until morning. This continued for months. I spent that summer bundled in electric blankets, feeling absolutely freezing cold, even on 90-degree days. Still, I kept working. I tried to hide from my employer that I was debilitatingly sick. I felt shame over being so frail. I spent all my free time sleeping, but berated myself for being so lazy. Doctors couldn't figure out what was wrong with me. I was tested for rheumatoid arthritis, lupus, and mono, but nothing came back positive. Then a cardiologist found out I developed a heart murmur, and a hematologist found out I had severe anemia, but neither could pinpoint why. I was still sick when winter came, nearly a year after the flu had started. No medical test or treatment could help me. No doctor could cure the mysterious disease that was plaguing me. The solution, which I finally discovered in November 2014, was that I needed to rest. Really rest. No faking I was fine. No pushing myself to exercise and write and go to work. It was excruciating to sit down around doing absolutely nothing. I skipped work meetings and forced myself to relax because by then I had no other choice. My illness kept getting worse and denying my body's needs. It wasn't working. I spent the next 2 months being completely unproductive. No juggling work and illness. No apologizing for being lazy and by doing more work than was healthy for me. Slowly, my energy began to come back. My fever disappeared. My red blood cell count went up. My heart murmur went away. Once I was fully healed, it was time to re-enter the world and find a new way to live that wouldn't destroy my body the way my old life did. Yo, real talk. When I was working in sales, so I had worked. So you guys know I'm on kidney dialysis. So dialysis is kind of like having a job in itself, and you're constantly going through that fatigue of dialysis. And so 3 days a week of dialysis, and then 4 days of work. So 7 days without having an actual break from neither dialysis or work. So no recovery time. And I did that for 2 years straight, no breaks. It got to a point where I started having this extremely sharp pain right here, right around where my gallbladder is. And my mother was worried. She was like, you need to take a break. And I just couldn't, because financially I couldn't do it. I just, because disability, it just isn't enough. And I would be just like sitting there in pain at work. And it got to the point where I couldn't even interact with customers. And I was in sales. I needed to interact with customers in order to make money. I couldn't do it. And it got to the point where I literally had to go to the store manager. And I said, I'm in pain. And he was like, yeah, just go home. I went home. As soon as I got home, a couple of hours after I got home, the pain went away. Then I went to dialysis and I rested when I got home. The pain was gone. My body was telling me, you're doing too much, bro. And so that's how it was. I've literally worked myself sick before. And that week when I worked myself sick, I had put in 21 hours in one day. I went to work at 11 p.m. and I didn't clock out till 7 p.m. the next day. Was it worth the money? Hell no. And I worked myself sick to the point where I was actually sick the next week. I'm telling you, man. And I was always worried about being viewed as lazy. And being fluffy made that feeling even more intense, because people also automatically think, oh, if you're big, that means you're also lazy. Man. In the years that followed my illness, I focused on building a tenable life for myself. I had to learn to budget my time into my day for relaxation and recovery. I abandoned my dream of becoming a tenured professor, which would require countless hours of research. Instead, I taught classes part-time as an adjunct and sought out online teaching options as often as I could. This allowed me to have a more relaxed schedule. I took breaks and defended my free time fiercely. I taught myself slowly that I deserved to be comfortable, relaxed, and happy. That's when a funny thing happened. The more my health and well-being improved, the more I noticed that my students, colleagues, and friends exhibited the same kind of self-punishing attitudes towards work that I once had. Just like me, they were beginning to pay the price for it. I realized that burned out, sick, overcommitted people were all around me. There was Max with her 80 to 90 hour work weeks. My friend Ed, whose mental health was put in jeopardy by their commitment to the domestic violence hotline they work for. And my colleague Alyssa, who was forever having to juggle the demands of parenting with the pressures of a full-time research job, all the while being judged by her in-laws and neighbors for her child-rearing choices. Then there were dozens and dozens of my students, of each whom had been told at some point in school that they weren't doing enough to get ahead, that they were lazy, and therefore not deserving of happiness or success. I realized then that my struggles were a part of a much bigger social epidemic, something I'm calling the laziness lie. The laziness lie is a deep-seated, culturally held belief system that leads many of us to believe the following. 1. Deep down, I am lazy and worthless. 2. I must work incredibly hard all the time to overcome my inner laziness. 3. My worth is earned through my productivity. 4. Work is the center of life. 5. Anyone who isn't accomplished and driven is immoral. Ooh, we're not even in chapter 1 yet, baby. This book is fire. What? let's keep going. Let's keep going. The laziness lie is the source of guilt that feeling that we are not doing enough. It is also the force that compels us to work ourselves to sickness. Once I began noticing the laziness lie all around me, I used the skills I learned as a researcher to delve deep into the history of laziness, as well as the most recent psychological studies about productivity. What I found brought me both massive relief and deep frustration. Research on productivity, burnout, and mental health all suggest that the average workday is far too long, and that other commitments that we often think of as normal, such as a full course load at college or a commitment to weekly activism, are not sustainable for most people. I also came to see how the thing that we call laziness is often actually a powerful self-preservation instinct. When we feel unmotivated, directionless, or lazy, it is because our bodies and minds are screaming for some peace and quiet. Damn! What? This is, yo, bars, baby. Bars. When we learn to listen to those persistent feelings of tiredness and honor them, we can finally begin to heal. I spoke with therapists and corporate coaches and learned about the steps a person can take to establish limits on their professional and personal lives. I found that by advocating for our right to be lazy, we can carve out space in our lives for play, relaxation, and recovery. I also discovered that immense relief that comes with we cease trying to self-image to I discovered the immense relief that comes when we cease tying our self-image to how many items we check off our to-do lists. The laziness we've been taught to fear does not exist. There is no morally corrupt, slothful force inside us, driving us to be unproductive for no reason. It is not evil to have limitations and to need breaks. Feeling tired or unmotivated is not a threat to our self-worth. Stopping right there. You know how many people, those of us who were raised Christian, we were taught that sloth is this one of the 7 deadly sins, and it's like you're sinful if you sit there and do nothing. Not realizing that maybe that's your body telling you something. Yeah. In fact, the feelings we write off as laziness are some of humanity's most important instincts, a core part of how we stay alive and thrive in the long term. This book is a full-throated defense of the behaviors that get maligned as laziness and the people who have been written off as lazy by society. It contains practical advice for how to draw better boundaries in all the areas of your life where you might run the risk of overcommitting, scripts for how to defend your boundaries and limits to other people, and tons of reassurance that your worst fear, that you're an irredeemably lazy person, is entirely misplaced. When people run out of energy or motivation, there is a good reason for it. Tired, burnt out people aren't struggling with some shameful, evil inner laziness. Rather, they're struggling to survive in an overly demanding workaholic culture that berates people for having basic needs. We don't have to keep pushing ourselves to the brink, ignoring our body's alarm bells, and punishing ourselves with recrimination. We don't have to deny ourselves breaks. We don't have to fear laziness. Laziness doesn't exist. And that's just the introduction. Chapter 1. The laziness lie. Boy, this thing is... All right. Chapter 1. I work in downtown Chicago, just off Michigan Avenue. Every morning, I make my way through throngs of tired commuters and slow-moving tourists, passing at least half a dozen people sitting on the street corners asking for change. Many times, I witness a suburban-looking parent discouraging their kid from giving money to a nearby homeless person. They say the typical things that people say about giving money to homeless folks. They're just going to spend money on drugs or alcohol. They're faking being homeless. If they want to improve their lives, all they need to do is stop being lazy and get a job. Remember how many times we heard this? Hello, Anna Kasparian. Anyway. It enrages me to hear people saying these things because I know surviving as a homeless person is a huge amount of work. Dr. Price gets it. When you're homeless, every day is a struggle to locate a safe, warm, secure bit of shelter. You're constantly lugging all your possessions and resources around. If you put your stuff down for a second, you run the risk of it getting stolen or thrown out. If you've been homeless for more than a few days, you're probably nursing untreated injuries or struggling with mental or physical illness or both. You never get a full night's sleep. You have to spend the entire day begging for enough change to buy a meal or to pay the fee required to enter a homeless shelter. If you're on any government benefits, you have to attend regular meetings with caseworkers, doctors, and therapists to prove you deserve access to healthcare and food. You're constantly traumatized, sick, and run ragged. You have to endure people berating you, threatening you, and throwing you out of public spaces for no reason. You're fighting to survive every single day, and people have the audacity to call you lazy. This is a note. If you're watching, and next time somebody who looks homeless, number one, acknowledge their existence. Number two, realize that they are working day in and day out just to survive. They are not lazy. And please do not put that on them. They are your human family. Recognize that. They recognize that they are struggling through this existence. And this system that we live in does not help. It exacerbates the conditions that we're going through. Continuing on. I know all of this because I have friends who have been homeless. My friend Kim spent a summer living in a Walmart parking lot after a landlord kicked them, their partner, and their 2 children out of the apartment they shared. The hardest part of being homeless, Kim told me, was the stigma and judgment. If people didn't realize Kim was homeless, then they and their kids will be allowed to spend the better part of the day at McDonald's, drinking Cokes, charging their phones, and staying out of the oppressive heat. I live in Florida. Trust me, I know. It gets way too hot out here. But the second someone realizes Kim was homeless, they transform in people's minds from a tired but capable parent into an untrustworthy, lazy drain on society. It didn't matter how Kim and their children dressed, how they acted, how much food they bought. Once the label lazy was on them, there was no walking it back. They'd be thrown out of the business without hesitation. Our culture hates the lazy. True. Unfortunately, we have a very expansive definition of what laziness is. A drug addict who's trying to get clean but keeps having relapses, too lazy to overcome their disorder. An unemployed person with depression who barely has the energy to get out of bed, let alone apply for a job, they're too lazy. My friend Kim, who spent every day searching for resources and shelter, worked a full-time job and still had time to teach their kids math and reading in the back of the broken RV that their family slept in. Clearly a very lazy person, someone who just needed to work harder to bring themselves out of poverty. Right? The word lazy is almost always used with a tone of moral judgment and condemnation. When we call someone lazy, we don't simply mean they lack energy. We're implying that there's something terribly wrong or lacking with them, that they deserve all the bad things that come their way as a result. Right? Lazy people don't work hard enough. They made bad decisions when good ones just seemed just as feasible. Lazy people don't deserve help, patience, or compassion. This is what our society teaches us, right? It teaches us all this, and we internalize it day in and day out. How many of you have internalized this? Man, it can be comforting in a sick way to dismiss people suffering like this. If all the lazy people I see on the street are in that position because they're lazy, I don't have to give them a cent. If every person who's ever been jailed for drug possession was simply too lazy to get a real job, I don't have to worry about drug policy reform. And if every student who gets bad grades in my class is simply too lazy to study, then I never have to change my teaching methods or offer any extensions on late assignments. Life, however, is not that simple. The vast majority of homeless people are victims of trauma and abuse. Most homeless teens are on the street either because homophobic or transphobic parents kicked them out, or either because or the foster system failed them. Many chronically unemployed adults have at least one mental illness, and the longer they remain unemployed, the worse their symptoms will generally get, and the harder it becomes for employers to consider them as a prospect. When a drug addict fails to recover from substance abuse, they're typically facing additional challenges such as poverty and trauma, which makes drug treatment very complex and difficult. Like somebody said, and it was very true, trauma is a gateway drug. Trauma is the gateway drug. The people we've been taught to judge for not trying hard enough are almost invariably the people fighting valiantly against the greatest number of unseen barriers and challenges. True. I noticed this in my professional life as well. Every single time I checked in with seemingly lazy and underperforming students, I've discovered they're facing massive personal struggles, including mental health issues, immense work stress, or the demands of caring for a sick child or elderly relative. I once had a student who experienced the death of a parent, followed by the destruction of their house in a natural disaster, then the hospitalization of their depressed daughter, all in one 16-week semester. That student still felt bad for missing assignments, despite everything she was going through. She was certain people would accuse her of faking all these tragedies. So she carried documentation with her everywhere she went to prove that these things had happened to her. The fear of seeming lazy runs that deep. It's just like when you need to take a break from something, or you need to call out sick or call in a personal day for something, and then you feel the need to give them the reason for why, when really you don't owe that person an explanation. Just like the word, you ever heard the phrase "no" is a complete sentence? Like, let's say, hypothetically, for instance, somebody asks you to help them out with something, right? With a work project or something. If you say no, that's literally a complete sentence. They would simply have to just accept that. But a lot of times people will go, well, no, because I have this to do and I have that to do. Why do you owe them an explanation, though? You could just be sitting there just to take the day off, just to do absolutely nothing. And that's a valid reason for you. Because you need to recover. Why do we view people as lazy when they have so much on their plates? One reason is that most human suffering is invisible to an outside observer. Unless a student tells me that they're dealing with anxiety disorder, poverty, or caring for a sick child, I'll never know. If I don't have a conversation with the homeless person near my bus stop, I'll never hear about his traumatic brain injury and how that affects basic daily tasks like getting dressed in the morning. If I have an underperforming coworker, I have no way of knowing that their low motivation is caused by chronic depression. They might just look apathetic to me when really they're running on fumes. When you've been alienated by society over and over again, you tend to look totally checked out, even if you're really busting your ass. Wow, man. The people we dismiss as lazy are often individuals who have been pushed to their absolute limits. They're dealing with immense loads of baggage and stress, and they're working very hard. But because the demands placed on them exceed their available resources, it can look to us like they're doing nothing at all. We're also taught to view people's personal challenges as unacceptable excuses. Z is re-entering the job market after years of combating heroin addiction. He's been hard at work fighting his addiction in rehabilitation programs, learning life skills in group therapy, and rebuilding his sense of self by doing volunteer work. Yet, when potential employers look at Z's resume, all they see is a gap in employment that is several years wide, which makes it seem like Z spent all his time doing nothing. Even some of Z's family and friends think these years of recovery as wasted time. We know that drug addiction is a behavioral and mental disorder, and we know that statistically, most people attempt sobriety several times before they succeed. Yet we tend to view people with substance abuse disorders as if they are morally responsible for having them, and as if every relapse is a choice they gleefully made. This isn't just true of how we view and judge other people. We also do this to ourselves. Damn, right? Most of us tend to hold ourselves to ridiculously high standards. We feel that we should be doing more, resting less often, and having fewer needs. We think of our personal challenges, such as depression, childcare needs, anxiety, trauma, lower back pain, or simply being human, aren't good enough excuses for having limits and being tired. We expect ourselves to achieve at a superhuman level, and when we fail to do so, we chastise ourselves for being lazy. We have all been lied to about our laziness. Our culture has us convinced that success requires nothing more than willpower, that pushing ourselves to the point of collapse is morally superior to taking it easy. We've been taught that any limitation is a sign of laziness and therefore undeserving of love or comfort. This is the laziness lie. And it's all around us, making us judgmental, stressed, and overextended, all while convincing us that we are actually doing too little. In order to move past the laziness lie, we must confront it and dissect it so that we can see the poisonous influence that it has exerted on our lives, our belief systems, and how we relate to other people. What is the laziness lie? Oh, this is going to be good. Have you liked the stream yet? Go ahead and give me a like. And also, if you haven't subscribed yet, go ahead and subscribe. What is the laziness lie? The laziness lie is a belief system that says hard work is morally superior to relaxation. I'm going to repeat that. The laziness lie is a belief system that says hard work is morally superior to relaxation. That people who aren't productive have less innate value than productive people. I'm glad I got this book. It's an unspoken yet commonly held set of ideas and values. It affects how we work, how we set limits in our relationships, our values on what life is supposed to be about. The laziness lie has three main tenets. They are: 1, your worth is your productivity. 2, you cannot trust your own feelings and limits. 3, there's always more you could be doing. How do we get indoctrinated with the laziness lie? For the most part, parents don't sit their kids down and feed them these principles. Instead, people absorb them through years of observation and pattern recognition. When a parent tells their children not to give a homeless person money because that homeless person is too lazy to deserve it, the seed of the laziness lie is planted in the kid's brain. When the TV show depicts a disabled person somehow overcoming their disability through sheer willpower rather than receiving the accommodations they deserve, the laziness lie grows a bit stronger. And whenever a manager questions or berates an employee for taking a much needed sick day, the laziness lie extends its tendrils even further into a person's psyche. We live in a world where hard work is rewarded and having needs and limitations is seen as a source of shame. It is no wonder so many of us are constantly overexerting ourselves, saying yes out of fear of how we'll be perceived for saying no. Even if you think you don't fully agree with the three tenets of the laziness lie, you've probably absorbed its messages and let those messages affect you, how you set goals, and how you view other people. As I break down each of these statements, consider how deeply they're ingrained in your psyche and how they might influence your behavior on a day-to-day basis. Your worth is your productivity. This is going to be good. When we talk to children and teenagers about our future, okay. Hold up. Let me take a sip. This first part, let's go. Oop, I dropped my. When we talk to our children and teenagers about the future, we ask them what they want to do. In other words, what kind of value Do they want to contribute to society and to an employer? We don't ask nearly as often what they're passionate about or what makes them feel happy or at peace. As adults, we define people by their jobs. He's an actor, she's a mortician, categorizing them based on the labor they provide to others. When a formerly productive person becomes less due to injury, illness, tragedy, or even aging, we often talk about it in a hushed, shameful tones, assuming the person has lost a core part of their identity. When we don't have work to do, it can feel like we don't have a reason to live. Whew. It makes complete sense, of course, that many of us think and talk in these ways. In our world, a comfortable, safe life is far from guaranteed. People who don't or can't work tend to suffer. Unemployed and impoverished people die at much younger ages than their employed or middle class peers. Since we live in a world that's structured around work, not working can leave a person socially isolated, exacerbating whatever mental and physical health problems they might be dealing with. The stakes of not being productive are dire. As a result, many of us live in a constant state of stress about our financial and professional futures, which means feeling a ton of anxiety about how much we are working. Michael's a bartender. He lives in fear that he's not working enough. He grew up on the south side of Chicago in a working class Italian family that dealt with a lot of dysfunction and mental illness. He carved out a life for himself despite all that and learned a skill that's always in demand. Now, he can't say no to a job. When you're a talented bartender in Chicago, you get asked to cover a lot of people's shifts. Michael snaps up every job offered to him, hopping from bar to bar across the city, even if it means getting only a couple hours of sleep in the wee hours of the morning. It took me weeks to even schedule an interview with him because his schedule was so overfilled. My entire life has been burnout, Michael tells me. When I owned my own bar, I worked 90 hours a week, every week. I was sleeping on the floor of the men's bathroom at night. I was booking the events, writing the food menu, writing the cocktail menu, getting orders from our suppliers, and doing the actual bartending. When the bar went under, I had to start taking whatever other jobs came my way. Michael has always lived this way. As a teenager, he was a ballet dancer. The unforgiving, workaholic world of ballet taught him to fill every waking hour with training and practice, and to ignore any signs that his body was breaking down. Remember Tiger Mom? About how this particular mother would make sure that her kids every single weekend was schedule all these different extracurricular activities. Really, they had no free time to just do nothing or just chill or choose whatever they wanted to do. Huh. Wonder how your kids are doing. He carried the same level of commitment to the adult world where he's worked without relent for decades. Even when he travels, he puts out feelers for bartending shifts he can pick up while he's in town. He's never known a break. He keeps meticulous spreadsheet of his hours and earnings, and the figures are mind-boggling. I worked 380 hours this March, he tells me. For reference, a standard 40-hour work week adds up to about 160 hours per month. The consequences of Michael's compulsive work habits mirrored mine and Max's in many eerie ways. A few years ago, when the bar Michael owned was failing, stress caused him to start vomiting blood. He also developed a nasty chill that would overtake him every evening, as what happened with me. Yet he kept pushing through his illness, hoping that by working harder he could save his business. Those of us who are particularly lucky get to retire after years of living this way. But because we've been taught to make work the center of our identities, we don't know how to handle a change of pace. Retired people often become depressed and see their lives as devoid of purpose. Like unemployed people, retired folks often report feeling directionless and lonesome. Their isolation and lack of daily structure can make them sick, putting them at an elevated risk of heart disease. Many of us spend our entire adult lives dreading this period of life, or we put it off by continuing to work past the point that's healthy for us. There's a lot of people who are retired and they keep working because they just don't know what to do with themselves. When the pandemic, I have to be careful what I say, but the pandemic hit Chicago and all the bars shut down, Michael was immediately overtaken by panic and dread. He had worked nearly every day of his adult life, and with the bars closed, he had no idea what to do with himself or how he would go about making money. So he set out to open a speakeasy in an empty storefront in the city. He knew He knew a lot of other service industry folks, some of them knew which vacant buildings he could sneak into to set up an illegal bar. Many of Michael's non-service industry friends were shocked that he would put his life and his friends' lives at risk in this way, exposing himself and everyone he knew to the virus by opening up shop. Eventually, someone persuaded him to reconsider. While I was so dismayed by Michael's speakeasy plan, I understood why it made sense to him. Life had forced him to be self-reliant, and his only escape from adversity was to work hard without consideration for how much it might hurt him. Work had already made Michael puke blood in the past. From his perspective, risking acute respiratory syndrome didn't seem all that different. 2 weeks into social distancing, Michael texted me, "I can't wait to have a damn job again. This is the most time off I've had since I was 14, and I'm going crazy." Lots of us are like Michael, even if our choices don't always look as extreme. We were unable to cut back on work, always reflexively taking on new responsibilities out of the compulsive fear that if we don't, our lives will fall apart. We've had to trade in our health for our financial or professional well-being, choosing between getting adequate time for rest, exercise, and socializing and logging enough hours to get by. Tragically, many of us do this not out of paranoia, but because we know just how economically vulnerable we really are. An international disaster like the pandemic only convinced Michael he was smart to have overworked as much as he did in the past. If he didn't, he wouldn't have even have a smaller financial nest egg to survive on. Chronic overcommitters are experts at ignoring their bodily needs. Our economic system and culture have taught us that having needs makes us weak and that limits are negotiable. We learn to neglect ourselves and see health as a resource we can trade in for money or accomplishments. This brings us to the second tenet of the laziness lie, that we cannot trust our own feelings of exhaustion or sickness, and that none of our limitations are acceptable. You cannot trust your own feelings and limits. Eric Boyd is a successful fiction writer, but he struggles constantly with the fear that he's going to screw up and lose everything. His fear comes from a very reasonable place. Before he became an author, he was in prison. He knows more intimately than most of us that the comfort and security his work has brought him could dry up at any moment. As someone with a prison record, he can't dive into the workforce with the same ease that many of us can. So even though his schedule is filled with speaking engagements, teaching opportunities, and paid writing gigs, Eric keeps signing up to participate in paid clinical trials and other side hustles. He never says no to writing or performance opportunity, even if it means traveling in the middle of the night from one city to another. He still fears that if he doesn't keep pushing himself to the limit, he will descend into laziness and never recover. I've talked to dozens and dozens of overworked people, and this fear is one almost all of them share. The people who log the most hours, who run themselves the most ragged, who say yes far more than is actually sustainable for them, are the ones who most suspect they are lazy. They seem plagued by the fear that deep down they are selfish, needy, and unmotivated. It may sound like paradox, but it's the core part of the laziness lie, perhaps the one with the most dangerous consequences. Whew. I'm telling you. The laziness lie tells us that we're all at risk of becoming slothful and unaccomplished, that every sign of weakness is suspect. It has many of us convinced that deep down we're not the driven, accomplished people we pretend to be. That the only way to overcome our selfish, sluggish instincts is to never listen to our bodies, never give ourselves a break, and never use illness as a reason to slow down. I used to feel guilty when I first got on dialysis, when I stopped working. I used to feel guilty about it. When I went on disability and I stopped working, I felt guilty. I felt that people would be looking at me like, you're just lazy. When I first got disability, this feeling came over me like, oh, finally, I actually get to relax and just deal with dialysis and nothing else. But then I also felt guilt. I felt this guilty feeling in the pit of my stomach that I was just being lazy. Because people will be like, oh, well, this person's on dialysis and they're working. Look at them. This person has cerebral palsy and they're working. This person is blind and they're working. This person is doing all. And for me, it was just like always being compared to people who seemed like they were doing so much worse. Wow. The laziness lie tells us that we're all at risk of becoming slothful. I'm sorry, I read all that. The aspect of laziness lie teaches us to fear and loathe our own basic needs. Feeling tired? That isn't a sign that you need sleep. You're just being lazy. Having trouble focusing on something complicated? It's not because you're distracted or overwhelmed. It's the opposite. You're actually needed to be taking on more in order to keep yourself sharp. Do you find yourself hating your job you once loved? You're just being a baby. You just need to push yourself harder and overcome how shamefully unmotivated you're feeling. Let me ask you this. How can I ask this question? Why do you drink coffee in the morning? Why do you drink coffee in the middle of your workday? Why do you stop for a coffee break? Why do you start smoking cigarettes? Just a thought. When we buy into this belief system, it becomes very difficult to identify our needs and advocate for ourselves. Back in 2014, when I was debilitatingly sick, I found myself doubting my illness at times. I wondered if I was somehow making up the fevers in my mind and secretly manipulating my friends and loved ones into feeling sorry for me. Even my doctor doubted I was sick, as I said I was. He made me record my temperature every evening in a little journal that I brought to his office. We both discovered that I had been running a fever of 103 degrees nearly every evening. Even then, I still felt guilty about being a bother. I couldn't understand why willpower wasn't enough to make me well. Remember how they say mind over matter? Up to a certain point. Our bodies and minds have many early alert signals that warn us about oncoming colds, hunger, dehydration, or mental fatigue. If you wake up with a sore throat or a sour taste in your mouth, you can plan ahead, rest up, and nip a virus in the bud. If you find yourself distracted by persistent thoughts of food, like I am right now, it might remind you to grab a snack instead of waiting for full-blown hunger pangs to come, which have happened to me. Right now, I'm hungry. But if I had eaten, I would have made me more sluggish, and I wouldn't have been able to do as good of a reading. Sorry. As if reading a single page in a book is too mentally taxing. And if reading a single page in a book is too mentally taxing, you can take that as a sign that your brain needs to do something more relaxing for a while. Yep. According to the laziness lie, however, these are not useful warning signs. They're deceptions. You don't need a snack, a cup of tea, or languid Sunday in bed. Those are just your worst impulses trying to tempt you into behaving badly. The laziness lie encourages you to ignore your body's warnings, push through discomfort, and ask for as few accommodations as possible. And at the end of all that struggle and self-denial, there's no reward. You never actually earn the right to take it easy, because the laziness lie also teaches you that you can never, ever do enough. There's always more you could be doing. The laziness lie encourages us to aspire to an impossible level of productivity. It sets us up to expect full 8-hour workdays of unbroken focus, followed by evenings filled with exercise, Instagram-worthy home-cooked meals, and admirable side projects. According to the laziness lie, a worthwhile person fills their days in ideal, industrious ways. They don't skip doctor's appointments, fail to get their oil checked, or miss days at the gym. If someone lacks the energy to make it to the polls on election day because they just finished working a grueling third shift job, the laziness lie says they're to blame for everything going politically awry in this country. When a part-time student doesn't have the mental energy to study after caring for her children all day, the laziness lie says she isn't smart enough or virtuous enough to get a college degree. There is no limit to what the laziness lie will do to persuade us that we need to be doing. Our aspirations can climb and climb, but they'll never hit the ceiling because the ceiling doesn't exist. If you're a diligent employee, the laziness lie will berate you for not volunteering more often or for not doing enough for your family and friends. If you devote your life to serving other people and meeting their needs, the laziness lie will point out that you're not working out enough or that your home is a mess. If you win a massive award or hit some other life-changing milestone, the laziness lie will smile politely and say, "That's very nice, but what do you plan to do next?" We're all taught to take immense pride in our achievements, but we're also discouraged from resting on our laurels when we do accomplish something great. No level of success grants a person the social permission to stop and catch their breath. We are forever left wondering, what's next? What else? The laziness lie teaches us that the harder you work, the better a person you are, but it never actually defines what an acceptable level of hard might look like. By forever moving the goalposts and never actually allowing the person to be vulnerable and have needs, it is setting us up for failure right from the start. It's just like, what's your purpose in life? As if you have to keep working and striving for that purpose. But then it's like, even if you're doing it, if you haven't reached a certain level, you still fail. Like I always say, the purpose of life is to live it. That's it. That involves work. That involves rest. That involves doing things for others. That involves chilling out. The purpose of life is to live it. That's my message to you. The purpose of life is just to live it. And what are you doing to live that life? Not exist, to live. And there are some systems that get in the way of you living, because the system only wants you to exist so that it can do for others, so that they can live. Here's the point. This past year, my mom suffered hip injury that would not heal. Instead of resting and attending her physical therapy, she kept aggravating the injury by standing all day at her job as a dental hygienist. She kept dragging herself to work for weeks, which became months, even though it was clear her body couldn't sustain it. It got harder for my mom to walk or stand, and she started to dread going into the office. Still, she kept putting off retirement. She'd been a dental hygienist for over 40 years. She kept reiterating to me it was who she was, the only job she had ever done as an adult. So the inevitable kept getting delayed until my mom's pain got so intense that she had no choice but to call in sick for every shift she had been on schedule. Instead of being the planned schedule affair she wanted it to be, my mom's retirement became an emergency decision announced to her coworkers via text message. The laziness lie kept my mom from admitting to herself that it was time to stop working. It keeps many of us from taking the time we need to recoup, or from spending our younger, typically healthier years doing things we generally love. So many of my friends and loved ones are hurting themselves in similar ways, leaving their health, relationships, and years of their lives as offerings to the altar of hard work. This is what the laziness lie has done to us. It has made us terrified of living at a slower, gentler pace. This understanding of the world has left many of us constitutionally incapable of caring for ourselves, let alone extending full compassion to others. What's worse, the laziness lie is so deeply ingrained into our culture and our values that many of us never think to question it. Here's the point. To fully appreciate its far-reaching impact and how it became so integral to our culture, we have to look back centuries into the origins of capitalism. Boom! And that's the end of part one. But she said it. The C word. She said it. And that's it. But yeah, yo, like, this is just like, what? You're constantly in a perpetual state of doing, and you never take a break. You never really take a break. And even when you have a day off, what are you doing? You're still working because you still got to clean your house. You still got to take care of your kids. You still got to pay bills. You still got to run errands. You still got to shop for stuff. You don't have time to actually rest. Hell, even religiously, what does the scripture say? It says a handful of rest is better than two handfuls of hard work. But we have to look back at the origins of capitalism in order to realize how we left this. There was somebody that made a video that said that even people in feudalism had more time off than we do in capitalism. Isn't that wild? Man. And I had a couple notes that I just want to say. Here's my notes. I said, lazy is a curse word in capitalism because your worth is tied to what you produce. If you can't produce, then you are deemed worthless. This system is so individualistic that it makes us alienate ourselves and others so that we have no idea what others are going through and we don't reach out to offer help when it's needed. People will point to others who abuse themselves into being more productive and show them as a shining example to follow. This is how they shame you into overextending yourself. Gregory says, "Didn't God rest for that? Look, if it's worthy for the Lord, yeah. But the thing is that that's what we're doing. And then how many employers will have you take your work home? They'll email you while you're at home. They call you while you're at home. Man, I'm gonna go to the chat a little bit. Y'all been chit chatting. I saw y'all been chit chatting. Man, so many good comments. Y'all were even talking about some psilocybins up in here. Rebel Dragon, this is interesting. Said, I made a vow a long time ago never to call anyone stupid or lazy. Still comes to my mind sometimes, but never out of my mouth. Then I beat myself up for even thinking it for a second. That's a good lesson. Yeah. Wow. Angela says, oh my God, I'm loving JB's hoodie. It speaks to me. It said objects in the mirror may be closer to the fear. Yeah, actually, this was designed by my niece. She designed it in her Etsy store. And so I was like, well, shoot, I want it. And it looks good. It's a nice design. So she created it. So I love this hoodie. So this was created by my niece. Actually, let me put the link in the chat. Yeah. If in case you guys want it, we're interested. So I'll put it in the chat. But yeah. But thank you so much. I'll let her know that you like her design. Whoever says my friend was freaking out that they were coming, but I found I could read the minds, so I told them that we were just coming to warn us some danger. Oh, I don't know what that's about. Sorry. You guys are having a deep, long conversation. See, Soul Construct says real people are always working on themselves in society. We just don't get paid as the ones taking our money. Yeah. whoever says that work mentality is nothing more than a slave mentality. What about the people who talk about hustle culture, right? Or ABC, always be, wait, ABC, always be selling, something like that. Thank you so much, Zombie in the Air. I appreciate it very much. Okay. Okay, thank you so very much. But yeah, so this is a something that I think a lot of people just aren't thinking about. But we are always always be careful. But that's something that I think that this system has perpetuated to us, and that we need to take time to resist against it. An act of rebellion is actually taking time to not produce so that you can recover. I think that's also an act of rebellion. Let's go to Rockfin. He's L Senpai says, totes me and about to leave work, listen to you. Oh, thanks a lot, E Senpai. Such a vicious cycle of self-destruction at the hands of the bosses and system. Yes. Dave Burt says, got to stream late but stabilizing screen video. Oh, okay. Good to have you, Dave Burt. Dave Burt says, appreciate the statement. Thank you so very much. Appreciate it. Thanks for watching on Rockfin too. Yeah. And so I think this is something that we need to take into consideration. Now, I got this book off Thrift Books. If you guys go to thriftbooks.com, I got this book. His book is used. And so if you guys are trying to look for, books like this for a cheap price, you guys can do that. Unless you guys want to get like the hardcover or the, paperback. You guys actually want to purchase it brand new, either or. But this is very eye-opening for me, and I cannot wait to get to the next one. Also, I will be continuing the reading because I'm halfway through Asada Shakur's autobiography. So we'll be continuing in chapter 9. Yes, chapter 9, which begins on page 141. So we'll be continuing that. And by the way, on the laziness does not exist, the next part will be continuing on page 23. And the next part is subheading is, where does the laziness lie come from? So I'll be excited to do that, and I'll try to get into that within the next week. So, did you guys like the stream? Did you guys subscribe? If you guys are new, go ahead and do that. Because I try to talk about these things all the time. And thank you so much to all the patrons on Patreon, as well as Coffee and members, because I would not be able to do this without you guys. This helps me in so many ways in order to continue to keep doing this. And, and as somebody who's on dialysis, and somebody who is faced perpetually with chronic fatigue, this book has been very cathartic for me, and it is making me feel like I can still be productive at my own level, but at the same time, not everybody has that ability, because how do you live? And part of it is, this is more than just, oh, well, some of us just need to take it easy. Some of us can't afford to. That's the issue. And that's the system that we live in. This is why pushing for a system that actually perpetuates this lie, we need to get rid of it. So, yeah. So I ran over time further than I thought, and I didn't mean to. But thank you so very much to everybody. And I hope you guys have a wonderful day. Water your plants, water yourselves, leave the world better than you found it. Look, smoke them if you got them, drink them if you got them. If you ain't got them, then laugh, because joy is revolutionary, but relaxation is also revolutionary. And remember, Jorge kisses, you're not lazy. You just need to chill. Love you.